you all. Thank you all for coming. We're going to be talking about choice boards today. And if you'd like to host like any kind of like meetings, normally we're doing them on Thursday and Friday. But if you have something like work around your schedule, something that you'd like to host, next week we're going to be doing one on hyperdocs, hyperdrives. So whatever you'd like to participate, just add it to the document either on Twitter or in our Facebook group. So the floor is yours.
Okay. I know that on the message, I think Kimberly was going to start. Is she here or?
Kelly was going to start.
Oh, Kelly. Okay.
I can start. Give me just a second.
Okay.
So my name is Kelly Bhullar. I'm the social studies consultant for one of our regional service centers in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I'm actually on the Dallas side of the Metroplex. And we've been doing webinars, and I did one not too long ago about choice boards. And so I was just going to share a few things. It's not anything that I really and truly, oh, Gabriel, if you want me to share.
Yeah, perfect. I have share screen on.
No, it tells me I can't.
Okay. Try it now.
There we go. So this was just, and I shortened it for this just to kind of show you the basics, but really what I talked about was, sorry, just kind of thinking about using choice boards as a way to plan. Here's my email and contact information, so feel free, and I'm actually going to give you the link to this here in just a moment, but feel free to reach out anytime. I am happy to share resources, ideas, whatever that may be. This is the link for this, and I'll stick it in the chat as well. Just gonna do that real quickly. But there's the link for this presentation. But we just really kind of talked about how, sorry, forgot this was animated. We just shared kind of some ideas about how you can use choice boards, and I actually talked about hyperdocs as well, but use them for planning virtually. And then I shared just some different resources. So the big thing we talked about was just with planning is really thinking about whatever your standards are, kind of in this remote learning situation, really thinking about less is more, that it's more about what the quality is versus how much you're pushing out to kids. And that really, thinking about how you're planning your lessons is still really, really important. And so what I just shared, and I've got, like I said, I've got stuff in here both about choice boards and hyperdocs, but I just shared different examples of different types of hyperdocs and choice boards. But I wanted to share, and there's links in here to hyperdocs as well. And there's also a link in here to, and Jessica Torres, I don't know if she's in yet, but I know she said she was planning on being here. She's the social studies consultant for Region 12, which is kind of the Waco area. This is linked to a similar choice board presentation that she did that has even more resources in it. So yeah, definitely check her stuff out. But this was kind of the...
Sorry, Kelly, the link's not working.
Uh-oh. I may have typed it in wrong. Let me show you this, and then I'll make sure I'll put in the right one so that you have access to that. But this was just an example that I shared with teachers of a way to do kind of a choice board / kind of a hyperdoc. But thinking about if you were teaching Reconstruction, giving kids that option of as a way to kind of find out information about the content. And this is actually an idea that I got from, there's a U.S. history teacher on Twitter. Her name is Amanda Sandoval, and I think she's actually in with your group as well, Gabriel. But this actually came from an idea that was on her Twitter of having kids read and providing that task, having them watch it, having them listen. But really the choice boards are just a great way. This one is a little bit more of a hyperdoc than a choice board, but just a different way of having kids access the information. And the way she had hers set up is on this last, each one of these was kind of like a day. And on the last box would be either kind of like the final task you want them to do, or on this particular day, we're going to meet together as a whole class and talk about and cover what you've learned throughout the week. So kind of a way to get the content out to students in a variety of different options, and then have some kind of final piece at the end of the week or into the unit or however you're doing that, for them to come back together and collaborate and share what they've learned from each other. Sorry, I need to click on that. It's linked to where you can actually make a copy of it on your own as well. This was another one. This was actually one of Amanda Sandoval's that was for Earth Day that I thought was really neat, but kind of tapping into just the different ways that you can have kids access information. So different ways that they could watch something or do or make, or act in some way, kind of taking it beyond just the classroom setting. And then at the last part of this, there's a Wakelet that has a whole bunch of other templates and examples in it. And then I'm going to stop sharing, but I'm going to make sure that that link is in there correctly for you. And then did we figure it out?
Yeah, Lisa put it in correctly.
Okay, I may have typed it wrong. I was typing it really fast.
Thank you.
But that's just all I was going to share. It's just, there's a whole bunch of links in there and resources. And I would really just say, if you're creating a choice board or even a hyperdoc, just really kind of going back and thinking about how, that you want to get good quality information to students. It doesn't necessarily have to be quantity. And then always providing some way for kids to come back together in some fashion to debrief, to share with you what they've learned, and to share with each other's as well. So that's all I was going to share, Gabriel.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Okay, next.
I'll go ahead and share. Hi, everybody. My name is Quinae Jackson. I am an academic coach at a middle school in Clayton County, Georgia. So hello, everyone. I just wanted to share briefly some ideas that I used with choice boards when I was in the classroom, and some ways that you can actually take those choice boards and make them digital. Because especially in this particular setting, we're all going digital. I want to share my screen. Are you all able to see my screen? Perfect. All right. So here is my contact information. Hopefully you all are seeing it. Twitter and on my website, and there are some templates and things that you all can use there. One of the most important things about using choice boards that I like to press and express is that it really gives you an opportunity for multiple and intentional access points. So looking at a choice board is, very different from just taking all of the worksheets that you have and putting links or putting them, saying you could choose to do this worksheet, that worksheet, or this worksheet. It really is a matter of being very intentional about providing your scholars with multiple access points to your content. It's a way to differentiate and really free yourself up so that you could engage in that feedback and reflection cycle with the scholars. So you're providing them all of the tasks up front, which is going to free you so that you can really conference with your students, really have the opportunity to engage in feedback cycles, really will have them come to you and reflect on what they're doing. So these are some examples here that are just like general choice boards, and I just wanted to make them big so you all could see them. But it gave some ideas of the different things that you could put in these spaces for your choice board. These are not choice boards that I created, but are ones that I have used as templates in my classroom. And it gives you some ideas of different things that you could put in those, particular squares. What I wanted to point out about choosing what goes in those squares. As a previous presenter also pointed out, it's very important to focus on quantity over quality. So when you're thinking of what's going to go in these particular areas, you want to think about scholars who are at all of the different academic levels. So you want to have something for your beginning learners, your developing learners, your proficient learners, and your distinguished learners. You don't want anyone to approach this choice board and feel like it's insurmountable, nor do you want any scholar in your classroom to approach this choice board and feel like this is way beneath me. So you want to put various entry levels that the students can access. And you also want to make sure you put different interests. So if you can see here, there's an opportunity for a student to design a mural. They could sing a song or a rap. They could interview a friend. So you're hitting all of those different types of things that students may like to do. Your drawers, your singers, your people who like to talk. We know students love to talk. So giving them the opportunity to interview someone about a particular topic is an opportunity for them to do something that they're usually told not to do, but they can do it through this choice board. I work with Nearpod a lot. I'm a Nearpod pioneer, and this is an example of a digital choice board. I heard you mention earlier HyperDocs and things like that. So this is an example of a digital choice board. And the example that Nearpod provided was actually for elementary, and so it had all different content. What I decided to do was to make this choice board, and I was actually teaching a class in addition to being an academic coach when we went into digital learning due to COVID-19. And so I created a Nearpod lesson and identified what was going to be happening in that lesson and put the code so that students could go in and, just like in tic-tac-toe, they could choose 3 in a row, they could choose a column, they could go diagonal, or they could access, do multiple of these lessons, not just doing, 3 or 4, whatever they wanted to do. So this is a great example, and I love what they did with this. And you will be able to take this and just create the lessons on Nearpod, or even use lessons that have been already created and share them with your scholars, and they're able to engage in a way that where they really can focus on what they like to learn, but also, again, making sure that you have all of those points. Did anyone have any questions for me?
Now, you wouldn't mind putting back up your contact information, would you?
Sure. Let me share again. I never use Zoom. We've actually been forbidden to use Zoom. And so I always use Google Meets. And so let me do this in the chat. I'm going to put my email, and I'm going to put my Twitter and the website, and you all can get it that way, because I just am not familiar, because our district forbade us from using Zoom. And I'm not sure if you all can see what I'm sharing or not, but it's going into the chat, okay? Any questions?
Do you have like a consistent rubric you use to grade them, or like what's your grading policy on choice boards?
So it's really going to depend on what the purpose of that particular choice board is. So for example, that Nearpod choice board, when they go in and choose whichever Nearpod activity they're doing, there are going to be formative assessments built in already. So there are going to be open quizzes in there. There probably are some collaborate boards, some draw it activities. And so it's really going to grade itself. If I'm using a choice board as sort of a cumulative activity, so say we've done a unit, and instead of giving my students a summative assessment, I want them to use the choice board to decide how they're going to express their learning, then I would have a rubric that is aligned to, we have what are called achievement level descriptors in Georgia. And so they align directly with our standards. So they say a student who is developing is going to be able to do this with this particular standard. A student who is proficient is going to be able to do X, Y, and Z with this particular standard. And that is my standing rubric that I use to really grade anything in my classroom, is if they can do at least what a proficient scholar is expected to do with that particular standard. So that is if there's, a standard rubric that I use, that would be it. Any other questions? And what I'm going to also do is I'm going to share this presentation, and you will be able to, you can take that, the instructions for creating that Nearpod choice board are actually in it's the last slide in this presentation, and those examples that I gave you there as well. So I want to let me go over and create a shareable link and put that in the chat as well, so you all will have that. Thank you. That's all I've got. If anyone doesn't have any more questions.
I love it. Thank you. I love the Nearpod connection.
Yes.
I actually had a question. I've never used Neardeck or Nearpod. Like, what do they do?
I'm glad you asked that question. So people wonder that all the time. They're always trying to compare the two. I do not work for Nearpod, but I am a Nearpod pioneer, so I'm always going to favor it. But it is because I have access to the fully paid suite of things that are in Nearpod. So it's always good for you to get your Title. I don't know if I'm sure you all do Title I. It's a federal program. So your Title I funds, or whoever does the funding in your building, get them in on your conversation with wanting to do these programs. What Nearpod does is it is an interactive learning platform that you can use to really formatively assess your scholars, but also get them engaged in the learning. They have virtual learning lessons. They have draw it opportunities. So say, for example, you're teaching and you say you're doing Texas history, right? You put in the state of Texas, and the students can actually go in and label where those county lines are, or label where those geographic features are. You can actually see them doing those things as they're doing it, so that you can, jump in if you need to interject, if you need to help them. Nearpod also has a comprehensive library of ready-built lessons. Again, some of those lessons are free. Many of them are going to cost, and it's a part of, the library. They have different levels. If you're interested in Nearpod, because I am a pioneer, I put my email address in. I can take you through that process. We can do a virtual webinar, and I can offer you free 3-month gold subscription. You can sort of see what it's about, and then you will have the opportunity to go back and talk with your administration about getting a district subscription for Nearpod. I don't use Pear Deck only because I love Nearpod, but it's similar, but not near the same. If you're an iPhone user, it's kind of like how you feel about your iPhone, and then people have their Android. That's how I feel about Nearpod and Pear Deck. No shade to anybody. It's just, my preference.
I can go ahead and present my slides if there's no
I know that there's lots of presenters, but just, anyone that wants to learn about Bitmoji classrooms or like virtual classrooms, they have lots of opportunities to share choices, and depending on what the students click on, I will gladly show you how to make it. I can share with you templates and stuff like that. Just, I don't know when, but how you want to do it, but just offering.
Okay, Lisa, ready?
Okay. I did put the link to my slides in the chat box. Hopefully you guys can see it now too. So I use Choiceboards a lot, even before we started the distance learning. One of the things I really like is when they're doing essay revisions. I work with the ELA teacher. Her big philosophy is you're never actually done writing. You just have a submission date. So I kind of encourage the students to improve their writing. So this is my revision choice board. It gives them a bunch of options. I have them draw a tic-tac-toe board on their rough draft, and then they're just showing me so at a glance I can see, okay, which 3 did you choose? And for this one, I asked them to do 3 things. And there are things that go with different levels of learners. So some students benefit more from these than others, but I make sure no matter what type of learner there is, there's something for them. So this is just my choice board for essay revision. Let me go to the next slide. Sometimes in a unit, I will give them options for learning the material, reviewing, and playing review games. They move through things at much different paces. And I use a lot of choice boards and a lot of Nearpods, especially when it's flu season in Pennsylvania. We'll miss like a third of our kids when they're out sick. So I have to have things that are digital for them to access. So this, I told them I didn't care what, they took a pretest, and then based on their pretest, they knew if they had to go back and read the material, review the material, or if they were allowed to play games. So this one was based on a pretest. Oh, I didn't mean to click that, sorry. This was pretest based, as was this one. This was a large unit, and there was 4 main parts to the unit. And so based on their pretest, they know which category they had to explore deeper and go back and review specifically. And for people who asked what the Nearpods looked like, I updated the codes. So if you were to put in any of those codes at nearpod.com, it would show you the student side. So it has things like the drawings and the embedded websites and the virtual field trips and all of that. So the 2 I just showed you, a lot of times it was the students would know what they had to do, and then they got to choose how they did it. For this, I use a lot of Newsela articles, but it would work for any type of current events. And I would use the same choice board throughout the year because I wanted them to have to think about the articles, kind of summarize it. I got a lot of memes. Sometimes they were better than others, but I incorporated things like the All Sides websites to force them to evaluate the articles, any bias it might have had. And this was something I shared with my PLC. So we all used something similar, coming up with things they were turning in. This allowed them to be creative or just synthesize the article and answer questions. And the last 2 Choiceboard examples I have, these are ones that I developed specifically for distance learning. So we were going through the ancient civilizations. Our school is one-to-one iPads, so I know the students have technology, but they don't always have access to consistent internet. So a lot of the things I would use would be a combination of both Wi-Fi and non-Wi-Fi options. There was always some sort of text set for them reading articles. For all of them, there was vocabulary, Kahoots, those type of things. And then I also create a lot of breakouts. So I think both of the slides have an example of a breakout I created. But for a kid who didn't want to use the technology, they could have used either Play-Doh, or I had kids using mud and practicing writing in cuneiform for the Mesopotamia. And this was for ancient Egypt. So you'll see a lot of repeats, the Newsela, the vocabulary, ed puzzle. This one has a virtual field trip for Nearpod, or building your own pyramid, or searching out other resources. So for the distance learning, it was more about giving them lots of choices. For some of them, we really encouraged them to get their families involved. Like for ancient Greece, they had to create Olympic events and then submit their scorecards. I would not expect them to do all of these. We were asking them to pick 2 on the board just to get them involved. So those were just some of my examples. I have a lot. Most of these are not graded based on like, this is worth 5 points. It was, you either did it or you didn't. And for the writing, like the essay revision, I graded the essay, but not the choice board. So that's what I had. Any questions?
Very impressive.
Thank you.
All of you have been awesome.
Okay, any questions? Or Nathan, are you ready?
All right, can you guys see and hear?
Yes.
Okay, all right, awesome. All right, so previous ladies did an excellent job talking about choice boards. I'm kind of going in a little different direction with mine. And I will share the bit.ly so you guys can have access to mine in the chat. There you go. Okay. So for mine, I'm going to kind of just preface with the purpose of Choiceboards a little bit, and then like how I use them, and just some reminders as you guys are using them. So one of the things that I really like to do is, since I teach U.S. history, I try to get my kids to really think independently as historians. So I want them to show me what they've learned, thinking analytically, critically, etc. So I always preface with my kids that I don't use tech just for using the sake of tech. I always have an intentional product or an outcome or goal with my students. I want them to know that this, after all, even if you finished your project, this is what the outcome or the goal is. And then I always have to think, how will this choice board assist their mastery of the project or whatever the learning is. And I think sometimes people will use choice boards thinking that is the mastery. It can be used as an assistant to that. Things to know and remember, students often know how to use the tool even if you don't. So a lot of times I'll have a plethora of different tools that my kids can use, and don't hesitate to use something if you're not completely familiar with it. Especially if you're in the secondary or in the upper grades. The students often can figure those things out. It's amazing how tech savvy these students are. And so that's something that they can use. Another thing to remember is if you are a Google school, or even if you're not, how are these students going to share the finished product with you? So if you're using tech tools, how are they going to share it with you to make it easier for you? One thing that I like to do is, since we are a Google school, I just have them share the link in their Google assignment. Another thing that you can do is, if you're not a Google school, you could use some type of form. I know Microsoft also has a form of some type where it collects their name, their email address, and then also the link to their final project. And then again, the focus on the content. So if you look here, this is a digital project menu that I have created and that I share with my students. Now I'll change it up. But I've included on that, and I will also share the actual Google drawing with you so you have access to that. All of these are linked to the actual website or to the tool. So that way that when your students click on it, if they click on Scratch, it takes them straight to Scratch or Wix, Prezi, etc. So here's an example. I like to use Stanford's Reading as a Historian. Reading Like a Historian, if you've never used it, it's a great website. Make students think critically and instead of using primary sources and even secondary sources. And so what I will do with my students is we'll focus on the actual sources for 3-4 days. And the students will actually go in and we'll analyze, critique, and do discussions with each other as a class or in small groups about the sources that they've read. And then at the end, they have the option of one of these, or even if it's not on the list, if they talk to me about it, to show what they've learned in some manner. So they could create a podcast where they're interviewing another historian, or they could create a journal entry as if they are someone during that time frame on the topic that was discovered or discussed at hand in class. So I always try to allow my students as much choice as possible to show what they've learned and to show their mastery of the topic, because not everybody learns the same. And, you know, especially with history, and I understand a lot of students can sometimes be often bored with history. So I want them to use firsthand accounts of what they've learned and have authentic creative projects that we actually share out to audiences, whether it's the school building, their parents, or we'll even publish things online. So I want my students to have an authentic audience because that makes it a little bit more personal to them. Any other questions from your end?
What's
I
a
like
Wix?
that. That's really applicable to high school students. I like that. Thank you.
Yep. You want the link to the digital choice menu?
That'd be great.
Yeah.
I thought I heard someone ask, what is Wix? Wix is a website builder, kind of like if you're familiar with Weebly or even like Google Sites. Wix is another one like that. It's free to use and really very, very easy to manipulate, very drag and drop. I used to have my kids, I used to have my sixth graders actually create public service announcements when we talked about globalization and global development. And they would use Wix and Weebly. And the kids, by and large, it was kind of like we were talking about earlier with like Nearpod and Pear Deck. It just depended on which one the kid liked more. They're very similar in a lot of ways, but they also have some differences.
Yeah, and I put, if you look, I've got Wix, Adobe's, and Adobe Spark is one that you can use for a website, and then Google website or Google Sites. Some kids like Google Sites because it's very straightforward, but some kids complain because it looks a little clunky. So I really just want to give them as many options to do to show their final project.
Nathan, you have a question. What do your students tend to choose most often?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones that kids like to do is Google Slides because it's simple. And you always get the typical, or not always, you frequently get the typical Google slide where, you know, they just kind of go through slide by slide and show me what they've learned. And while they can do that, this past year, my last group, I would say sketch notes were probably the most popular one that kids showed what they learned. I love it. I had to jump into it a few years ago. I was a little bit nervous because, you know, kids are like, I can't write or I can't draw. And I found a couple of great resources to help my students be able to like just kind of step-by-step process of like different things to draw and add to their sketch notes. But my kids really loved it. They were able to freely show what they've learned. And I felt like they didn't have to be perfect. They felt like, in my perspective, that it's okay if I mess up a little bit because I can, you know, manipulate it or change it, or, you know, it's a big conglomerate of different ideas anyway, so nobody's going to really notice if there's a small little glitch. But I had some phenomenal different sketch notes that my kids produced this past year.
Any more questions of what typical time to finish your projects?
That's a great question. At the beginning of the year with my kids, I got a little bit more time. Our district does not have a late work policy. So if students are turning it in 2-3 weeks after the fact, I mean, still graded as is because we're SPG, so we focus strictly on the mastery of the skill. But I typically, so for example, if I go back to the Stanford Reading Like a Historian, I'll give them 3 days, 4 days to look at the resources. And I try to teach my students how to time manage. So look at 1 or 2 sources a day and then move on to the next ones. That way they don't become overwhelmed because I'm prepping them for the upper grade levels such as APUSH or US history, where we're going to have large chunk projects. For the final project, when they're actually working on it, I at least give 3 days because a lot of times the kids, and we're not a block schedule, so I've got 50-minute classes, which are relatively short. But a lot of times students will spend at least half the class trying to figure out what they even want to start with. And so I don't want them to feel as if, you know, they have to rush to figure out how they want to show what they learned, because then they don't feel like it's their own and they can't, I feel they don't take as much ownership over it. So I try to tend, at least at the beginning of the year, give at least 3 full days for the final project.
How much specificity do you get with the rubric? For example, like in Google Slides, what if the kids ask like how many slides there are, and how do you ensure consistency with the production of student choices?
That's great. I do show student examples from previous years and I have the kids discuss, what do you think would be a great example of these? And I have many different options. And then I say, which ones do you think are not great? Of course, leaving it anonymous, so I remove any names or anything like that. But then I show it of different topics because I want my kids, all of their learning to be authentic, and they're showing what they've learned. So I show different examples from different topics or different units for them to see. When it comes to the Google Slides, I always tell my kids it's not the quantity but the quality. So I always preface that with my students and emphasize it throughout the entire portion of the project building, that, you know, they'll ask me, well, is this good enough? You tell me, is this something that you're wanting to turn in as is, or is this, if you were to hand this in to me now, would this show that you've mastered the project or the learning target? So I don't really ever have a minimum on the slides, because if I do that, I frequently, because I used to do that, I'd say, you know, you have to have a minimum of 5 paragraphs or a minimum of of 5 slides, that's what I'd get, would be that minimum. So I want the kids to make that decision themselves, because I'm really trying to enforce and to have my kids think for themselves. If that answers your question.
Yes, it did. Any other questions in the chat or audio?
I would just say really quick, before you choose one of those platforms, I would say call your school's IT department and make sure it works on your students' technology. We had students we let them choose between, we're a Google school, so we let them choose between Wix and Google Sites. And then some of the kids got about halfway through their projects and they got locked out of the thing by IT, so they lost all their work. So it definitely was not a good experience for them. So I would just double check and make sure that before you give a whole bunch of choices in terms of platform, that you make sure that your IT department will allow it to happen.
Also, always check with your district on COPA laws. I mean, especially if you've got kids younger than 13, you always have to be careful of that. So check with your district to see if they are, all of that fits in, as always.
Any other questions?
Gabriel, there was a question in the chat, in the chat about sketchnoting.
Yeah.
Sketchnoting is, it's not an app, and they kind of put in there, or someone put in there to look it up on Twitter. Sylvia Duckworth is kind of the lead on it, I guess. But it's just a way of note-taking using images and doodling. But it's really, really beneficial. There's so many resources out there. If you just Google sketchnoting and Sylvia Duckworth, there's a plethora of stuff. And I think she does her own webinars and professional learning on it as well. I'm the same way. I'm terrible. I'm not a drawer.
I'm trying to find examples for my students. So I was just going to post the link real quick, if possible.
Yeah, go ahead.
But in the meantime, someone else can go, or we can keep going forward. So
we can keep going forward. This is the last. Share anything. So as a reminder, we are going to be doing a presentation 2 next week. One of them is going to be on HyperDocs, and I'm also trying to put together a panel for new-ish teachers, as people are moving into social studies or into different contents. If you have any ideas for something you'd like to see or something you'd like to present on, go ahead and fill out the doc. I put it in there, or you can shoot out to me on Twitter or on Facebook, and we can put something together.
I just posted a link. As a class, sorry, Gabriel. I posted a link to one of the tweets that I posted a few months ago. All of my classes, so I've got 5 core classes, and together they created a grade-wide sketch note. So there's an example on the whiteboard in the class. And then I was looking for other ones, but I got way too much media on my Twitter.
Well, thank you everyone for presenting and coming by. And again, any ideas, feel free to shoot out. I am recording these. Once I get some time to edit them, I'll post them on our YouTube channel that's still developing with the Social Studies Network. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Great.
Have a great weekend.